Welcome, Gunrunner.
As a console, Milton Bradley's Vectrex is totally unique. Not only does it come as a complete unit with its own screen, it's also the only one to use vector graphics. It's perhaps easy to forget that at the time of the Vectrex release in 1982, vector-based arcade games were a pretty big deal, with titles like Star Trek, Tempest, Battlezone, Lunar Lander and Asteroids raking in the money. In fact, the latter of those is still Atari's most successful ever arcade game. So when Smith Engineering created the Vectrex for general consumer electronics, it was a pretty big deal. Unfortunately, the Vectrex experienced a very short life due to the impending North American video game crash, but the console deserved so much better. It was a completely different beast to many of its rivals like the ColecoVision, Intellivision and Atari 2600. Not so much competing with them, but offering up something completely different. And with that undeniable uniqueness came some pretty unique games too, that gave its owners some nice alternatives to the many impressive arcade ports. Personally speaking, the Vectrex is one of my all-time favourite consoles, for all the reasons above and more. Although I have absolutely no nostalgia for it, I never even knew it existed back in the day, I still get a warm fuzzy feeling every time I turn that knob and hear the little intro tune. As you can probably imagine, this was a video that I've wanted to make for some time now, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to get around to it. So without further ado, let's get going with those games as I present 10 amazing MB Vectrex exclusives.
This is an ordinary TV video game. This is Vectrex, the only video game system with its own video screen. Take it anywhere, just plug it in. It's your own personal arcade. A high-performance system with a built-in game plus a whole collection of arcade cartridges like Scramble, Pole Position, Berserk. So if you're into video games, forget the TV. Get into Vectrex. Light pen and 3D imager available.
GCE's Hyperchase is a driving game that bears a rather striking similarity to Activision's Enduro for the Atari 2600. Despite its name, there's nothing to chase here. It's a straight up arcade style racer that offers up two slightly different gameplay variations: race to get the best time or race for the high score. The first really interesting thing to note about Hyperchase is that the road never truly curves, probably because of the way the vector lines need to be drawn, but instead it undergoes an interesting change in perspective to let you know that you're turning. Because you're looking down on your car from a third person perspective, you get an excellent view of the road ahead, which helps with this. It's certainly a unique way of doing things and makes the game feel a lot more original. Visually, this game is pretty impressive. The road, trees and other objects around the road are scaled very smoothly to give a great sensation of both speed and visual depth. The sound effects are also very good, suiting the game perfectly. My only real complaint with Hyperchase is that the controls were a little bit too twitchy, but you'll soon get used to them after a while. The Vectrex doesn't have a lot of driving games, although the port of Pole Position is very impressive indeed, so Hyperchase almost becomes a default purchase. But I'd maintain it's a pretty good game anyway. This almost seems like a pointless inclusion here, as Mindstorm is the game that comes built into the Vectrex console, but for those who don't yet own one, it's worth covering in more detail. It's fair to say that Mindstorm was very much inspired by Atari's Asteroids, but does improve on the concept somewhat. Rather than space rocks, you now have to clear a field of mines, and these explosive devices come in several different shapes and forms. Some mines will fire something back at you when they're destroyed, some just explode, and other mines gravitate towards you and will chase you around the screen. Like asteroids, you can hyperjump, as it's called here, where you reappear on a different part of the screen to get out of trouble. Again, like Atari's game, the field starts with a few large mines, but is quickly filled with smaller mines as you start shooting them. In addition to the mines, there are also some enemies that attack you, each in their own particular way. When you clear a level, a very nice intermission shows you warping to the next level. A mothership drops mines, and the action starts all over again. I should note that a Mindstorm 2 is released as well to fix a glitch in the original version of this game that makes it crash on level 13. But I doubt you'll even get that far, as this game is pretty challenging. Mindstorm looks great, sounds great, and plays great too. Like many other original games of the Vectrex, Spike also draws inspiration from elsewhere, being influenced by the likes of Donkey Kong and Space Panic. Spike's girlfriend Molly has been captured by his arch-nemesis Spud, and it's up to you to rescue her. In order to do so, Spike must position the ladder so he can climb to different platforms, pick up the key, and then open the cage where Molly is being held. Of course, there are enemies on the platforms who will do their best to stop Spike from achieving his goal. These annoying enemies trying to stop you include both bouncers and birds, but Molly will help Spike by dropping her bow to him. Should Spike catch the bow, the bouncers freeze in place, giving you the chance to move without any hassle. Even without the bow, Spike isn't entirely defenceless. He can simply kick an enemy off the platform, but this is quite difficult to do. As the game advances, the platforms change direction randomly, and they also change in size. You need to be careful not to reach the edge of the platform, because if you do, you'll get dropped on the ground below and a life will be lost. The pseudo 3D graphics look great, but they do make it more difficult to judge your position and make precise movements. The sound, however, is possibly the best of any Vectrex game out there, with amazing digitised speech throughout. Platform game fans should definitely take a look. Also known as Web Warp, Web Wars is often described as the Vectrex's answer to Tempest. However, I've always felt that that's a bit misleading, as the gameplay is actually quite different from Atari's arcade classic. In the game, you take control of the Space Hawk travelling through a web of fantasy in order to capture 20 different prizes. Of course, this isn't an easy quest, as enemies start to approach you as soon as you fly down the web. It's best to try and take them out as quickly as possible, but if they do reach the edge of the web, you can actually move forwards and backwards a small amount, a bit like Centipede I guess, in order to take them out. As the attack waves advance, prizes you're supposed to pick up are also rushing towards you. It's easy to tell these apart as they're brighter in appearance, but you can't just wait for them to come to you. Instead, you need to extend your tongue and grab them. As you can only extend your tongue for a short time, the timing of this is essential. Once you've captured a treasure, a square doorway appears. You must go through this doorway immediately so you can enter a trophy room where you can see the prizes you've captured so far, which also gives you a bit of respite from the relentless attacks. If you miss the doorway, a huge space dragon comes after you and usually kills you. Web Wars is a really fun and frantic shooter. Also known as Spinball, not to be confused with the Sonic themed pinball game, this one presents us with a fairly simple table featuring 4 flippers, various bumpers, ramps and bonus multipliers. All pretty standard stuff so far, but Flipper Pinball does introduce a couple of interesting elements to make the game more fun. Firstly, there's a star that spins around in the centre of the table, that traps your ball and then splits it into 2. This of course activates a multi-ball of sorts, but when this happens, a barrier also appears between the flippers, meaning it's easier to keep these balls on the table. The trick to high scores here is by using the upper flippers to keep the ball in the upper half of the table and repeatedly hit those multipliers. But this does lead me to a little bugbear I have with this game. You cannot see the score while you're playing, which seems unnatural in a high score based game, where you want to see your points rack up. And related to this, there's also a consecutive 2-player mode, where you can take it in turns on the table and compete for the highest score. What's here is certainly well presented, and the graphics work well, although they are quite flickery, which some people might find annoying. The audio, which consists of both effects and small pieces of music, is very nice indeed. Despite the lack of variation, Flipper Pinball is a fun diversion from all the shoot 'em ups on the Vectrex. Based on the first Star Trek movie, this game puts you in command of the Enterprise on a mission to destroy a Klingon mothership. In order to do this, the Enterprise needs to be guided through 8 sectors of space that are full of Klingon and Romulan ships looking to take you out. The Enterprise is, of course, armed with phasers and shields for offensive and defensive manoeuvres. Unfortunately, the resources of the Enterprise are quite limited, so you'll need to dock with Federation star bases to replenish its weapons and shields. The trick is doing so while enemy ships are attacking, whilst also making sure not to accidentally destroy the starbase itself. Once all enemy ships have been cleared from a sector, the Enterprise moves on to the next one until all 8 sectors are cleared. Once that task is completed, you can warp into Sector 9 to defeat the Klingon mothership. This task can only be completed by shooting the mothership right on its nose whilst it's glowing. Although using the weapons is pretty self-explanatory, the shields can only be used at the precise moment when the Enterprise is being attacked, in order to deflect enemy weapons. If not timed correctly, the Enterprise is hit and a life is lost. Later renamed Starship when the license ran out, this game features great 3D graphics, excellent sound and some really compulsive gameplay, making it a real must-have title for the Vectrex. There are a number of really cool prototypes out there for the Vectrex, but for me, Tour de France is the most interesting of them all. Firstly, because of the subject matter. It's pretty unusual to find a game based on cycling in the first place, let alone on a niche console like the Vectrex that is somewhat restricted by the type of games it can play. And secondly, because it's based on the famous French road race, the biggest and most important cycling event in the world, so it has a lot of instant name recognition. Last but not least, because it's actually very well implemented indeed, with 2 different courses to play and some clever controls that even require you to change gears. It would also be remiss of me not to talk about the visuals in more detail, because they are rather impressive, it has to be said. The glowing cyclists and roadside scenery look great, and the way the road undulates through the hills and valleys is a really nice touch. As well as avoiding other riders, you'll also find bits of debris on the road too, and you'll also need to pick up bottles of water from the side of the road to keep your energy topped up. If you fail to do this, you won't be able to ride as fast and will ultimately lose the race. The in-game audio is pretty basic, but there is a nice little tune on the title screen. Tour de France is certainly quite a challenging game, but it's also a very impressive one that's quite unlike anything else on the console. Like Web Wars, which we've already looked at, Bedlam is another game that draws comparisons with Atari's Tempest. But again, like Web Wars, this game might have some elements that are inspired by Tempest, but it's definitely its own unique game. In Bedlam, you control a ship which bears more than a passing resemblance to the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars that is fixed in the middle of the vector. You're unable to move from this location, but you do have the ability to rotate at 2 speeds in order to target the enemies that come at you from the outer points of the vector. This starts out as a pretty easy task, but as the levels increase, things get much tougher. The enemies advance at different speeds, and they all have different behaviours too. For example, the X-shaped enemies are the toughest to kill, as they stop and change direction, then circle you and try to get you from behind. Once you reach the 3rd level, the vectors also start spinning around as well, which makes things much harder. To add even more challenge still, these vectors also shrink as the game advances too. You can stop them from doing so by shooting them repeatedly. In addition to your regular weapon, you can activate a zap once per level, which kills everything on the screen, working just like the Super Zapper on Tempest. This is a seriously underrated game for the Milton Bradley console. Back in the day, everyone had their own answer to Pac-Man, and Clean Sweep is GCE's. Whilst the gameplay here is nothing original, the premise certainly is, as you control a vacuum cleaner in a bank as you try to sweep up all the coins that are spread across the floor. You must do this as the criminals trying to rob the bank make their way around its corridors. This hoover can only carry so many coins though, so periodically you'll have to take them back to the vault at the centre of the screen. You score points by picking up coins and returning them to the vault. In order to stop the robbers in their tracks, you have to enter one of the 4 corner rooms in the bank that make you become supercharged, and then turn the tide against them for a limited period of time, just like the power pills in Pac-Man. All this sounds very exciting of course, but it's still basically Pac-Man, and you'll need to use your imagination a bit to visualise the adapted concept. The game has 2 different gameplay variations, one with a visible maze and one without, as well as a 2-player option where you take it in turns to achieve the highest score. One really interesting thing about this game is that a special edition was released to promote a spirit brand called Mr. Boston's Clean Sweep, which is very rare and sought after. Clean Sweep seems a little more sedate than Pac-Man, but it's still a rather enjoyable game. despite its rather unusual name, Fortress of Narzod is a very enjoyable and incredibly unique shooter for the Vectrex that sees you guiding your ship through a simulated 3D canyon whilst destroying enemy ships. What makes this really different from other 3D shooters of the time is the way you interact with the canyon around you. Both your bullets as well as those of your enemies bounce around the canyon when you shoot, so you have to be really careful where you fire because you could end up destroying yourself. Of course, you can also strategise how you want your shots to bounce to maximise effect within the canyon too. The enemies vary greatly in shape, size and behaviour, and some don't just disappear in their shot. Their carcasses lie wounded on the ground and block your shots for several seconds. Unlike many other shooters, you don't just move horizontally, you also have the ability to move vertically as well, which adds to the strategy and becomes important when you have enemies beneath you or need to dodge bouncing bullets. Once you've completed a stage, you enter the titular fortress to move on to the next level. Once you've completed all stages, you finally get to face the evil Narzod himself. With great graphics, atmospheric sounds and highly original gameplay, Fortress of Narzod has to be the very best exclusive available for the Vectrex.
Give up my Atari? My television?
How about for this?
You bet your asteroid.
Introducing the revolutionary Vectrex arcade system. No TV set needed. Instead, Vectrex has a real arcade screen built in, so you get challenging real arcade graphics and sounds with every Vectrex cartridge. No wonder Vectrex was chosen 2-to-1 over Atari and Intellivision for real arcade gameplay. So compare. Discover how Vectrex brings real arcade play home.
And that rounds up my look at 10 amazing MB Vectrex exclusives. Can you think of any other one-off titles that only ever came out for the quirky 8-bit console, or do you think some of these games were unworthy of inclusion? As always, I love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons to continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Grady Haynes, Mitchell Valentino, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Sonic Mania 999, Paul Daniel, Andrew McKay, Retro Resolution, Matt Standish, James Taylor, Trogdor the Burninator, 8-Bit Guy, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to host extra content including downloads, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.